My name is Dr. Chielos Onaeze. I'm a professor in the English department. I have the honor to introduce our featured speaker today, Professor Léonce Ndikumana. Professor Léonce Ndikumana is a distinguished professor of economics and director of the African Development Policy Program at the Political Economy Research Institute at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He is a member of the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation and former member of the United Nations Committee on Development Policy. He is an honorary professor of economics at the University of Cape Town and the University of Stellenbosch in South Africa. Please help me to welcome our featured speaker, Professor Léonce Ndikumana.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Unfortunately, yesterday I was not able to follow the presentations. I only listened to the keynote speech by Mamdani. Then I had to run to teach, to work. Yeah, we have to work. That's the problem. But today I was really able to enjoy all the presentations. It's amazing. I want to congratulate Janine and the team for the amazing job in putting together such an impressive group of presenters. I'm not an expert on anything that has been discussed, so you would wonder why do I end up here? The reason is that Janine asked me, and of course, for those who know Janine, I had no choice when she asked me, so I said yes. In Burundi, you don't say no to your sister's request. It doesn't happen. You can try. But also, I have been following from a distance the work she has been doing and her colleagues in really expanding the work on the research on genocide, the context of genocide, the implications, and so on. And I think this is a big investment in knowledge, but also with a lot of policy implications. I think, as you will use, I don't have to tell you that conflicts are still part of our lives. So therefore, it's important to understand why those phenomena happen and how to prevent them if we can. So in my presentation, I will not be sharing with you any personal stories, although I could. But I'll draw on my experience from having grown in a country that has had more than its fair share of conflicts. As my sister Immaculée has done this very moving presentation, I'm sure we could have given her 2 weeks and she would have plenty of things to say. But also my presentation is about my work as an academic interested in the issue of conflict and post-conflict peace building, as well as a policy student, having done policy, worked in the policy world. And this is something that policymakers struggle a lot. The framing I'm going to use is going beyond I'm not going to talk about any cases, but I want to expand our analysis to include an institutional perspective. Because conflicts, genocide, these are things that happen to real human beings and are perpetuated by real human beings. And many times I think the default is to put all the burden on the individuals, whether they are the victims, whether they are the perpetrators. They are the ones who suffer. They are the ones who commit the crimes. And in the end, society pretends as if then it's the role of the victims and the perpetrators to find a solution, end the crimes, to end the war, and to end the genocide, and to recover from. So you will hear people say, why can't people just live peacefully together? Why can't just people learn to live together? Why can't people trust each other? And so what the presentation I want to give here is to invite us to reflect in a broader perspective, and say what kind of institutional context facilitate that kind of peace building, reconciliation through, and what is the role of state institutions or the state? Because I keep telling people who say, why is it that people cannot learn to live each other? Why to live with each other? Why don't people learn to love each other? I live in Amherst, Massachusetts. It's probably one of the most peaceful places in the world, except my village in Burundi. And in this country, in this place, I can leave my door. I do leave my door open. I leave my cars outside, and nobody touches them. It's not because my neighbors are saints. We love each other, but that's not the point. The point is, we both know that if anything happened to my car, everybody would be responsible, and somebody would hold them responsible. So it's not about people loving each other. It's not about people being saints. It's about the environment they live in is such that there are clear rules of engagement among individuals, and those rules of engagement are also enforced, in which case I don't need to care whether you are red or white or blue and so on, or you love me. I don't care. You will respect me, you respect my property, you respect my family, and so on. So that's for me, the reason why we need to think about institutions, the state, and what it plays in terms of rebuilding societies after conflict and building peace. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me put that one, see how it looks. Okay, so what do you see?
PowerPoint.
A PowerPoint, very good. You see a PowerPoint. If you see a PowerPoint, that's what you should be seeing. Okay, so here we go. So my talk is about trust as a prerequisite for building peace. And here I'm going to talk about the various dimensions of trust, not just the trust of, too fast. The trust of neighbors and countrymates. As I said before, conflicts are still part of our lives. This is a report from GHRAD. They identified 11 conflicts to worry about, or 10 conflicts to worry about. That was before Ukraine. But the most important thing I wanted to point out is that if you count the number of countries that are involved by those major conflicts, 6 are in Africa, so 50%. So Africa has had its fair share of conflicts over the past decades. I had other data, but I decided not to dwell on that. Everybody knows that it's an issue in Africa. This is a very interesting statement from one of the academics that works on conflict. He says, it's not how the past dictates the present, but how the present manipulates the past that is decisive. this is about trying to understand what causes conflict, why conflicts arise. And there is a temptation that, especially in the West, especially when conflicts happen in the South, in the global South, to think that conflicts are just an outcome of madness. These Africans are just animals; they just kill each other. If you take that as the framework that conflict are just sudden eruptions of madness arising from age-old hatred among ethnic groups, that Hutus and Tutsis will hate each other all the time because they have always hated each other. You have heard that before. In that case, that means that we cannot do anything. If ethnic groups go in, start conflict because they naturally, inherently hate each other, then you can just pray and hope that God will do something, in which case there's nothing a human being can do. But if instead you think that there is method in the madness, in the sense that there are clear mechanisms that lead a country to move from an apparent peaceful state to conflict, then you can understand the mechanisms and the factors that lead to conflict and try to do something about that to deter the occurrence of conflict by acting on the factors and drivers of conflict. When we think about conflicts, there are two key factors that we emphasize. One is what we call the underlying factors that are part of society, part of the structure of the society, which, when you look at conflicts, end up being part of what is the makeup of the conflict. It could be ethnic groups, could be religion, language, and all that. But those are part of all societies. So you can't say that ethnicity is a cause of conflict, because otherwise all countries would be in conflict. You can't say that different languages, the difference in languages is a cause of conflict, because all countries will be in conflicts. Even the US has more than one language. Anyway, but what matters is then what ignites the conflict. What ignites the conflict is what we call trigger factors. What causes those underlying factors to become mechanisms and vehicles of conflict is something really, really bad happens at a particular time, and it gets manipulated, utilized, instrumentalized by political entrepreneurs who want to advance their own interest. A bad election, a natural disaster, and then conflict happens, because then the politicians, the political entrepreneurs will have identified the weak points of the society that they can exploit to foment crisis. In this talk, I'm going to focus on the role of trust in the state in post-conflict building. I'm not going to talk so much about why conflicts happen. I'm going to talk about cases where the situation where the conflicts have happened and countries are trying to rebuild after conflict. So in terms of thinking about conflict, the transition from conflict to peace building, one thing we need to emphasize first is that the recovering from conflict is not the same as re-establishing the pre-conflict conditions, because those conditions could actually be part of the reasons why a country went to war, went into conflict. So, for example, my colleagues have talked about countries that have had conflict, Ethiopia, Burundi, and so on. So the idea is that when the war ends, we don't want to recreate the same social structures that existed before. A country that was led by a monolithic army, you don't want another monolithic army to rule over the country, because you're going you're only delaying other conflicts. And many times conflicts arise because of alienation, exclusion, certain groups feeling not associated in the power structure. So they are trying to advocate for their rights because they are not being listened to. So they end up going in the bush and taking the arms and so on. So in the end, the way you structure the institution after conflict matters a lot, especially what kind of power sharing arrangements are put in place to ensure that those who lost the war, or who may not even have participated in the war, even whether they are minorities or minorities, will be protected. So winning the war is one thing. The most difficult thing is, how do you preserve the peace after the war has ended? And one of the things that is very, very fundamental is justice. How do you do justice? How do you give justice to people who were discriminated against, who were oppressed, who were violated, whose rights were violated? So transitional justice is paramount. And many times the problem is that people do not want to talk about it. But you cannot heal a problem, a disease, unless you talk about it. So telling the story about the conflict, the genocide, the killings, and finding a way to understand who was responsible for what is one way to begin healing. And again, as I said, it's politically demanding, it's uncomfortable, but that's the only way you're going to move ahead. Then there's the big issue of security and stability in post-conflict settings. One of the biggest challenges is how to build a national army that's depoliticized, that is responsible for security of everybody, not just their own ethnic groups, and that is a big issue. So the challenges faced by states in post-conflict countries are manifold, but the literature emphasizes four main challenges. One is how to manage and rebuild the economy. The second is how to manage and rebuild a political system that is inclusive, that everybody would find that they are associated with, and how to rebuild social cohesion. How do you rebuild a society where everybody respects everybody? And how do you run a public administration that's competent and efficient? That forces us to think about development in different lanes, where the state plays a primordial role. One is the responsibility to generate what I call the peace dividend. Because during conflict, people lose a lot, and some people lose lives, but even those who are saved, they have lost their wealth, they have lost their income, their job opportunities. So everybody has high expectations about better life after conflict, which we call the peace dividend. That's how you empower the people to believe that I'm a citizen, I have something into this enterprise of development. That development has to be inclusive. That way you can ensure that every citizen feels that what's being built in the country is built in for me, for my future generations. Therefore, I own the national assets. Otherwise, in a country, for example, where there is a lot of inequality in terms of asset ownership or income ownership, then it means that some people feel alienated. What belongs to the state is not mine. One of the reasons why conflicts happen is when groups are alienated from benefiting from the resources of the country, and therefore they feel that they can, the only way they're going to get a share is to go fight. The secession wars you have seen in many countries, the Congo from the 70s, and even now there are always these these tensions. The state has to be able to regulate the economy, legislate, and enforce the law so that everybody feels safe. Security is paramount. Then the state has to protect all citizens and consolidate social cohesion so that there is trust that's underlying the structure of the society and the relationships between the state and the people. And that's where I'm going to spend the rest of the talk. So what's the role of the state, of trust? And here we're talking about trust at two dimensions. There is horizontal trust. It's trust among the people, among the citizen, but there is also vertical trust. It's trust between the people. It's trust of the people vis-a-vis the state and vice versa. So what is trust? At the macro level, we're talking about political trust, which is defined as a basic evaluative orientation towards the government, founded on how well the government is operating according to the people's normative expectations. Trust in government is distinct but interrelated with social capital, which are shown next, and interpersonal trust. So here we're talking about how the people, the citizens view the state. Is the state delivering on my expectations? I expect to have a better life. I expect to be safe. I expect to park my car in the parking lot and find it there. That's when I'm going to trust the state institution. Now, there are different ways to think about that relationship between the state and the public. One is, from a rational perspective, as a citizen, there are things I expect the government to do that advance my rights. So me having a job, secure job, me having my assets protected. But there is also a more psychological aspect of that has to do with, do I see the government being fair? Mm. Is this an ethical institutional environment where everybody is respected, everybody is given a chance? Because it could be that I feel that my needs are served, I'm going to school, but I feel uncomfortable by the fact that my co-citizens are being neglected, in which case I'm not going to give a high mark to the government. So there is both the rational individualistic aspect of trust, but also there is the psychological, the more altruistic dimension of trust. Now, at the micro level, we're talking about social trust, which is the citizens' confidence in each other as members of community. The point of my presentation is that the two are not separate. The two are related. You cannot expect the people to trust each other when they do not trust the state, because the state is the guardian of the enforcement of the relationship between the citizens, so that those relationships are respectful, accountable, and any violation of the people's rights is going to be handled accordingly. So the two dimensions are very, very related. So why do we care about trust? We care about trust because I'm talking about post-conflict peace building. Trust comes at both levels. In, first of all, understanding why conflicts happen. As I told you, conflicts happen when there are underlying factors of conflict that could generate conflict. People have talked about poverty, that poverty generates conflict because people who are poor don't have anything to protect, so you give them a gun, they're going to shoot. People talk about ethnicity, ethnic diversity or fractionalization, all those natural resources. But I submit that none of those directly causes conflict. They are going to be as vehicles of conflict if the environment, the institutional environment has lost the control of the economy, of society, of the institutions, and has alienated the people. So, and that means when the people feel that the state has no more capacity or willing to protect them, advance their own interests, then they take the matters in their own hands. And that's why here we say that the trust provides a causal link between the underlying social economic conditions and opposition to the government, meaning violence. It is through the impact of individuals' orientation to the state, their trust in the government, that factors such as poverty explain conflict. So a country that has a large number of poor people is not necessarily going to be a violent country, not going to experience violence. But when people feel miserable, alienated, and they believe that the government has abandoned them, they can't trust the government, they will try to do anything, including violence. So trust, or the lack of it, has shown to be associated with onset of conflict, the inability to negotiate peace settlement, and to sustain peace. That's why we care about trust. We also care about trust because it comes at the end of after the conflict in terms of facilitating or not facilitating peace building. At the end of the conflict, we hope that peace is established and consolidated and the economy recovers. But that requires a capable state. What do we mean by a capable state? A capable state is a state that's able to accomplish its main functions, including running the economy, running the judiciary, so that is peace, mediating social conflicts at the individual level, but of course, enforcing the sovereignty of the state, of the nation in terms of territorial sovereignty. That's very important. When a state has those capacities, it's likely to generate, to benefit from trust from the public. And that will facilitate peace consolidation because people will believe in what the state say, because it has demonstrated effectiveness. Otherwise, people will say, "Oh, we have heard you say that, but we never saw the evidence." So trust is important because it fosters cognitive mobilization of support towards public officials, organizations, and political institutions by the local population, and motivate commitment. This is very important. A government does not develop a country. I keep repeating that. A government guides the public towards development by designing policies, implementing policies. But when the public does not trust the state, they will not cooperate. They will not buy into the the policies being proposed by the state, which means that the capacity to implement the policies depends on whether people believe that that government is actually working for me. They trust the government. When they propose a policy, they'll rally behind the policy, and the policy will succeed. In a sense, delivery on policies buys you trust. But if you don't have the trust, you won't deliver because the people will not cooperate, will not support the government's initiatives. So if people distrust the state, they are less likely to endorse reform plans. They will be less inclined to comply with the state rules and regulations, and may uphold support for challenges of state authority. It means that they will rally behind opposition and even rebellion as opposed to the state. So the people must trust the state. And trust will come from demonstration that the government, the state provides what the public needs. Public services, the economy is booming. Yeah, we'll say, we see you. The public will trust the state if it empowers the public, that instead of dictating what they want to do, they work with the public. The public expresses their needs and their views, and the state implements them. The state protects the public security. And this is very important. The state humanized. This is very important especially if you draw on the presentations that have been made before, because one of the things that happens during conflict is people are dehumanized. Remember the presentation from my sister who just finished talking, widows who are meant to believe that they are responsible for their misery, that their husbands were traitors, and therefore they have no rights. They can't even mourn their husbands. In a situation like that, why would you expect people who have been dehumanized to go and rally behind policies enacted by a government that's dehumanizing them? It won't happen. So in addition to the material development goods and services that government need to provide, a post-conflict country needs to gain confidence and trust from the people who have been dehumanized during conflict. And that's the only way you can leverage their energy, their human capital, their financial capital to build the state. Now, there are two-way relationship between the effectiveness of the government in doing all those, achieving those objectives, in the sense that a government that achieves the objective is going to be trusted, but a government that's trusted is also going to have an easier way of achieving its objectives. So the state must demonstrate that they have the concern of the people. We have you, we hear you, we hear your pain, your misery, and we are here to advance your interest. Trust in the government is an evolutionary process. In the beginning, it's going to be very tough. Many times you have seen that in countries that come out of conflict, the governments that come into power are made of former rebel leaders, and some people associate them with the war. So it's going to take time, but by delivery, by showing empathy with those who suffered from the war, initially it's going to be hard, but in the end, governments may begin to score points vis-a-vis trust, and then over time, trust will consolidate. So the other last point is about trust is path development, is path dependence, in the sense that memories can be long. A government that has oppressed you will have a hard time convincing you that they have changed. And that's important. Why we need to think about what kind of institutional mechanisms are needed, what kind of institutional engineering is needed at the end of the war to demonstrate that the era is new, that we are engaging in a new era, that the institutions that oppressed you are no longer there. We are brand new institutions that are working for everybody. So after conflict, the nations that are trying to rebuild are facing a dual challenge. One is to develop trust in the new post-conflict state, which may look different from the old one. They may be new, they don't know how to do things, they have a different ethnic makeup, regional makeup, religious makeup. So how do they develop trust from the public? The second is taking out those nightmarish memories of people who have suffered from conflict, like these widows who have gone through nightmarish months and years. How do you convince them that now times are different, that they can trust the state, that they can trust the administrator of their commune? That, for example, I said I was going to talk about my personal experience, but anyway, just to illustrate this point, in my area in 1972, one of during the mass killings of Hutu civilians, one technique that was used in my area was the administrator called all male adults for a meeting, a forum, as they normally do during peacetime, and it was called a pacification meeting, and that's when they rounded up adult male and shoot them. So in this case, people have that in their mind. So if you say, come join into a government initiative, how do they know that it's their own interest? Or is that a trap? because in this case, it was a trap. So if you had experience of a government that put their own people in a trap to kill them, how do you, at the end, believe what they're telling you? Or is it just a reenaction of the past? So trust, again, has two dimensions. There's a trust. The people must trust the state must trust the people, and the people will trust the people. So there is an interlinked micro-macro dimensions of trust, in the sense that trust in the state is what nurtures horizontal intergroup trust. I told you my neighbors, I trust them, but actually I trust them because I trust the state. They are not listening to me, so that's fine. But also this trust, which I derive from this trust of my neighbors, which I derive from the fact that I trust the state, is going to help me consolidate the trust to the state, because I believe that we, the neighbors, we are in together for the same cause, which is well-being of everybody else. So that's what allows you to create an environment for peace, because everybody now feels invested in peace, because the state is there for me, my neighbors are there for me, everybody benefits from peace, from this trust at both levels, and therefore you can have an environment for consolidating the peace. So how does the state gain the trust from the people? Do you remember this thing that called, is the economy stupid? No, it's not the economy smart. It can't just be the economy. Because you can think that, oh, because conflict countries lose so much, the economies are devastated. If you just come in and build the economy is booming, you're creating growth and building roads and schools and so on, you have the trust of the people. I say, maybe not enough. You may need to do more. I can give you just, sorry, I'm an economist. I'm going to give you two illustrations. If it was true that all you need is to deliver on the economy, then you would say, if you have good economic outcomes, you would have trust to the people. This graph says on the horizontal axis is the inflation rate. On the vertical axis is the percentage, the extent to which people trust the president, the government. The further to the right is bad because you have high inflation. The higher up is good because you are trusting the president. But how come in a country that has, Mauritius has very reasonable, very low inflation rate, 4% in Africa, everybody can pay anything to get that. So why don't they trust the government in Mauritius? And in Tanzania, they have very high inflation rate, but they actually trust the government. I don't know. One thing is, it's not just about inflation. The Tanzanians probably like their government for other things they are doing. The Mauritians don't like the government because of other things they're doing, and probably because Mauritius is developed, well-educated, and so on. People are very critical of what the government is doing. So we can't just say, deliver on low inflation and you'll be trusted. Deliver on high growth and you'll be trusted. Same thing here. You have this is poverty and trust. Once again, why would a country with such high level of poverty trust the president? And why would Mauritius and Morocco not trust the government because they have very low inflation? Again, there are other things they don't see in what the government is doing. So it can't just be money, can't just be growth, it can't just be inflation. And if I had another session to present, I would talk about why this matters, for example, for aid, development, international aid, that when you're intervening in post-conflict countries, you just don't throw money on conflict and you have the outcome. No, there are much, much more deeper issues on the human social side, emotional, psychological side, which can't be bought by money. And those who have to address them. So then I'm telling you, you can't just grow the economy and have trust. So what do? One is dealing with a tragic past. Because many times there's a temptation that when the guns stop, when you sign the peace accord, you say, done. We have finished the war, we have finished the conflict, let's move on. Give me money, I build the roads, I build the bridges, and I build the schools, and we keep going. I tell you, it won't work. You need the wisdom to learn the truth, to listen to people, to tell you individual and collective stories, to teach the people about what happened, and then you can heal and have closure. Do not try to bury the truth, because the truth is really, even if you bury it, never rots. I mean, it's very stubborn. Again, that was the last time I'm going to talk about my experience. I happened to be from a place in Burundi that probably was the worst hit. And the psychology of the people is so painful. Let's not talk about it. Let's just move on. It's easier to forget it. It was bad. It was a nightmare. We go. The problem is that it comes to haunt you if you don't acknowledge it. And it's not easy, but because it's not easy doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So that's one. The other is, as I said, the state has a big, big challenge of demonstrating that they are committed to change. That's not about the rhetoric, it's not about the words, not about the speeches, that they really want to move forward in a better country with better institutions, with better respect of human rights and all that. But still, you will need to feed the people. It's going to be very hungry. A hungry stomach doesn't have good ears, okay? You have to give people a reason for hope by building an economy that delivers the goodies for everybody, that's inclusive. So for example, I want to illustrate this. One of the problems with post-conflict countries is high unemployment of the youth. And generally, I have been saying that for Africa, probably the biggest challenge that all countries have is the unemployment of the youth. And now a new form of youth unemployment, the unemployment of the bachelor's degree holders. It's scary to think about people who can read, understand, interpret things, who have no hope. I lived I was in Tunisia when the Arab Spring started, and we all know that the biggest driver of that revolution was youth, Tunisian young people, some of them with 2-3 degrees, with no hope of ever finding a job, ever having a life. The person who ignited the whole thing was this college graduate who was vending his fruits, and the police ransacked it, and he said, what's the point of living? He tortured himself. So post-conflict countries have the challenge of demonstrating to the people that they have something to hope for, and therefore they should go behind the government program and rebuild the country. Political legitimacy, accountability, and representation. A state that people have to look in the state as if they are looking in the mirror and see themselves. If they don't, they won't believe it. Civic engagement is probably the most visible demonstration that the government is committed to change, is legitimate, and is willing to listen. Because many times you'll see that when states close in to become authoritarian, the first thing they do is suppress the media, suppress the civil society. So if you wanted to say, is this government serious about inclusive development, participatory development, Ask them, do you have a free press? Do you have a free civil society organizations? That would be one way to see whether they actually believe it. So that's what I want to say. Now I'm leaving you. Again, I told you I'm a teacher. I'm going to leave you with the homework. It's due on Monday. Name a post-conflict state you know of that, according to you, is on track towards consolidating trust in the state among the people. How would you rate it along the matrix on the previous slide? Thank you so much. I like the clapping when people are on mute. Because I hear them like loudly.
Mute.
Thanks everybody for listening. It's hard to to do the last presentation because people are already tired and yeah.
There's a question in the question and answer.
Okay, so
Read it. I can read it if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Isn't there also a danger in trusting the state too much? What is the role of a critical stance vis-a-vis the state? A stance that holds the state to account, that makes the state earn and maintain the trust of the people?
That's a fantastic question. Remember, there's a slide where I say trust development is an evolutionary process. The state cannot take the people for granted. And the people cannot be too naive, because we're talking about states which also have their own interests. A government has their own interests. It's made of politicians who have their own interests. They have their different time horizons and so on. So that's when I said rules of accountability, systems of accountability, systems of check and balances are paramount, because a government can say, oh, last year they gave me an A and they gave me a stamp of approval so I can go and do whatever I want. No. It's a constant evaluation of what the state is doing. And it's important that that trust is based on evidence, of demonstrated evidence of commitment to change by the government. The government is never done changing. The government is never done proving itself vis-a-vis the public.
Thank you. And I see Dr. Ize's hand is up.
Yes. Thank you very much, Professor Ndikumana. This is a mind-blowing lecture, and I love everything you say. So, just as you were talking about trust, you made something that struck me, that made me begin to think about the experience of various countries in Africa. I'm interested in particularly in the role of Nelson Mandela in the post-conflict South Africa. And while you were talking about how the state humanizes, I thought that perhaps that's also one of the things that made him stand out, that even though many South Africans are criticizing him for not having taken drastic action to better the government, but I interpreted him as, first of all, humanizing the people, so making those who have been dehumanized for centuries, making them believe that they are human, and creating conditions for trust among people, as you stated, trust on the micro level and then trust on the macro level. So this is just a general comment, but I'm also wondering whether you could comment on that. And also, if one compares his country to the neighboring countries, Zimbabwe. So Robert Mugabe, had also to some degree some trust, but I think that his own trust was based on was completely different. He approached he extracted trust from people through another means by making them always believe that he was fighting on their behalf, and by relying excessively on this anti-imperialist rhetoric. So, and even while their economy was not booming, they still trusted him. So this is just thoughts that came to my mind, and I was wondering whether you could comment on these states, on these issues and personalities.
Thank you very much. I think your illustration of the case of Mandela is right on the money, because I think he understood that, first of all, he was a student of history, so he understood his history of his country very, very well. That people had not just been excluded from the economic system, but they have been meant to believe and to be seen as subhumans, as second-class citizens, as people who don't belong there. And the concern was, how do you rebuild a community after the end of that system, where the dehumanizers and the dehumanized are going to be living together? Because they have to live together, they have to go to work together, they have to go to school together. And I think that's one of the things that helped him was to take a very long view of the solution. Because he understood it was a very deep problem, he understood it won't be solved in one go, that you have to find a system that is going to evolve eventually, where the Black people are going to feel more comfortable, are going to have more say in the system over time, that you can't just change the whole system and reverse the ownership structure. But also the fact that he was courageous enough to confront history and say, let's look at the history ourselves. Let's look ourselves in the mirror and see what did we do to ourselves, to our fellow citizens. So truth and reconciliation. Many times, many people, when this idea was proposed, they said, "Oh no, you're going to create a civil war. You're going to undo everything you have accomplished." But he proceeded with Bishop Desmond Tutu doing a fantastic job. But we also know that there's still major issues in South Africa in terms of social cohesion, xenophobia, and all that. So it's an unfinished job. The third thing I want to say is that all those things will work if you have a leader. Mandela could have said, I suffered 27 years, now I'm going to build mansions in every city, I'm going to build wealth, and I'm going to just do like everybody else. South Africa would be a completely different place. Or he could have said, I'm the ANC leader, I don't care about anybody else who is not in ANC. The country will be completely different. And when you now look at the case of Zimbabwe, I think, again, I still remember when I was in high school, Mugabe was an icon of anti-colonialism struggle. He had great ideas. But then I think when you don't have a strategy on how you exit from power, power corrupts and will corrupt absolutely. And I think that's because I think my sense is that Mandela felt that he had done what he wanted to do. And before he even went in, prepared his exit. Many times our leaders do not have an exit strategy because they don't even think about exiting. They come in, they want to stay. And when you do that, basically, in the beginning, you may be successful, but then you begin to erode everything you have done before because the trust of the people begins to erode. Because you say you're building the economy, people say, oh, I know. You see, he's only building his own wealth, the wealth of his own people. So that's the idea of evolutionary trust building, two-way relationship, it's a work in progress. Thanks a lot. I see.
You have another question. Yep, Dr. Kubai.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please unmute yourself. Please, can you please? Yeah. You still on mute. Yes. Finally. Oh, there's an echo. There's an echo. When you speak, there is an echo, and we can't hear you. No, it's not working.
Can you type your question in the Q&A and maybe?
Yeah, can you type your question and then I can answer the question. In the meantime, we can take somebody else. I don't know. Can you type the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was a comment, but Mugabe was killing tens of thousands of Zimbabweans in Matabele land from the beginning of his very long time in office. He was totally partisan.
Yeah, that again, leadership. I think leadership matters. And many times, I think bad leaders have a hard time hiding their bad side because it will always emerge. And the longer they stay in power, the worse it gets. Because again, it's not about advancing the interest of the people and the economy as a whole, the country as a whole. It's their own egomaniac and sectarian interests. So, yeah. Let's see if. Okay.
Okay, you go first.
Yeah. I see both Dr. Terregeza and Dr. Ibrahima's hand up. So
okay,
go first. Chris is there too. I will.
So who is going first?
I said to go first. That's good.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this enlightening presentation. Really, I've learned so much from it. But I know that I've gathered you're an economist, right? We're definitely talking about development and reflecting about Africa and our policies. We cannot really avoid international policies and their hand in pretty much, development or even state formation, right? So whenever we talk about government in Africa, we talk about good governance, all those sorts of amazing things. I usually have a hard time really grappling with the issue of sovereign African states. I know we are sovereign, but how sovereign are we if we cannot really decide and take on our economy? Because it's almost every sub-Saharan country depends on the money from IMF and World Bank.
Mm-hmm.
How do we really manage this in terms of state building, economic development, or, you name it pretty much? How independent are we even to think and talk about leadership? I just want to hear what you think of it. And I know that it's not something we can answer in the short minute that we have, but yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a fantastic question. I think that's something we struggle with in all dimensions, whether it is about economic development, political systems, civil society, and so on. What kind of policy space do African countries have, African states have, in terms of designing their own institutions and implementing them so that they meet the needs of their countries, rather than serving the interest of outsiders? I think if you go back to the case of South Africa, one of the advantages of isolation was that South Africa did not depend on the IMF and the World Bank to give them money. And that's probably was a big, give them a lot of space in the way they design their post-apartheid economic systems. Whereas in the rest of our countries, they are so indebted to the rest of the world for everything they do that they have very little space to craft a system that actually caters for the needs of the people. They always need a stamp of approval by whoever, this Washington, Paris, Brussels, and name it, and now Beijing, and I think, yeah. So that makes that makes the solutions more complicated, because again, you don't have that leverage of sovereignty. Now, how do you get it? One, I can tell you that the world is not going to come one day and say, sorry, the West is not, sorry, we actually got it wrong. So we now have decided that it's better that we give you your freedom on a very nice diamond plate. It won't happen. So the question is, how do countries extract their sovereignty from the hands of the West, which really wants it? And the West is withholding that sovereignty, not because they do not like Africans, not because it's because it makes money. It makes money and it increases their clout in terms of military, political, economy, and all that. So again, that's when we have to try to understand, how do you generate indigenous forces of development, indigenous sources of development, starting from very simple things. That can we not raise more money than we can before we go to Washington and Paris and so on? This is something I keep giving a very simple example. In Amherst, a very small town, the majority of the resources comes from real estate tax, okay? If you go to African countries, they can't even tax the houses in the cities because they don't know where the house is. They don't have no number. Even if you want to pay your taxes, it's so hard to pay the tax that you give up, okay? So I think the challenge is to African states to try to develop their own capacities to achieve at least the potential they can before even they go abroad. Because it's easier for when ministers of finance do their budget, the first thing they think about where are we going to find the aid? I mean, can you not run a plan without aid? There was a time where Kenya under Moi had a dispute with the UK, and then the donors said, "Oh, we're not going to give you aid." If you look at the data during that year, the budget did not decline. Okay, they found the money internally. So I think it's a matter of creativity, lack of ingenuity, that it's so easy to go to the same old sources of funding. And now they say, okay, China is coming, it's going to give us money. China doesn't give you money for free either. So development funded primarily by the outside will not be sustainable. Everybody knows that. And unless you have a sustainable development program, it's very hard, impossible to have free political systems. Yeah.
Can I read Dr. Kubai's question now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, she says, thanks for a very illuminating lecture. Now, the freedom fighters became founding fathers. Then a generation later, people began to riot against oppression and marginalization, lack of trust. Then militants emerged and violence is widespread. Then the warlords and militia leaders take power and become leaders, human beings don't change. How can we teach these people the rules of good governance, building trust, and building good institutions? They are militial in their heads and warlords. The case of South Sudan and Sudan is an example.
Yeah. Yeah, so I like somebody just pointed to the Kenya Revenue Authority, which has been quite good at raising revenue. That's another issue, another idea of institutional engineering, that you can do it if you just think more creatively. I think that's the point that Anne, and too bad she couldn't, her video, I mean, her audio was not working. The point she's raising is a fundamental point about how countries emerge from conflict and design institutions that actually lead the country towards peace. And it's about how do you design leadership? How does leadership emerge from people who were organized to fight the other people? When you are the head of a country, your job is not to fight the other people, it's to fight for everybody, okay? But when you are a rebel leader, you fight the other guys by all means. And I think many times rebel leaders have a hard time converting into national leaders because they keep in the mindset is about what's good for my group, what's good for my ethnic group, my region, and so on. And let me get back to these other people who oppressed me during their regime. And that's when you see rebel leaders coming into power. They do a wholesale reorganization of the government. They fire everybody, whether you know what you're doing or not. And I keep telling people that when I look at developed countries like the US and so on, presidents change, but technicians don't. Technicians, the ones who are actually doing the work, they remain the same, accountants, engineers, and all that. But in African countries, a new leader comes, and there goes everybody, from accountant to clerks, which means you never building human capital. You never building institutional memory. And merit is ignored for the sake of politics. If you're competent, I don't care. If you are not a member of the party, the winning party, you don't get anything. So I think, again, Africans have a choice. They can keep blaming the rest of the world, blaming the colonizers, blaming everybody else, until they decide that it's their job to do things differently. I still remember a former prime minister of Ethiopia once was giving a speech when I was still at the African Development Bank. He says, you know, us African leaders, I find ourselves amazing. He was being cynical. He said, we keep doing the same things over and over again, and we are surprised that things don't change. Yeah, if you keep doing the same thing, you get the same outcome. Yeah, I think the ball is in the camp of the Africans as leaders to do things differently, as citizens to put more pressure on the government to hold them accountable.
Yes, and we have two more questions, if you don't mind engaging us for a little longer. Dr. Ntergeza, see your hands. Do you want me to read the question first?
Let's go to the participants first. Thank you.
Her question will last 2 hours. That's
So this question says, your presentation feels like a blueprint. I'm interested in the building of post-conflict leaders who will lead the state. Yeah. Besides sifting through the very difficult histories, accountability, perspectives of historical events, etc., how can we hone in on leadership development that can work in specific cultural contexts?
Mm-hmm. Again, I think who is that? That's a fantastic question. I think she's or he is asking the central question to these issues.
I think it's Rebecca.
Rebecca. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. That's an amazing question. I think if we could invent a leader, we'll have solved all of our problems. Because that doesn't mean that one person is going to, I want to be cautious here. I'm not saying that one person is going to change the whole world, because many times also there is this, we veer in the other direction, that some leaders come and people start worshiping them, and they think they have found the solution to all. You remember at the end of the 80s, there was this idea of the new generation of African leaders, and they thought that we have found all the issues. The problem is that they had invested in individual leaders as opposed to institutions. So a good leader is the one who comes and helps build institutions, because in the end, the leader's lifetime is limited, and the test for a good leader always is whether they live in the place people who are competent enough to perpetuate what they are doing. And many times, my concern is that when I see countries, people I say they're doing very well, I'm saying, okay, who will be next if this person drops dead tomorrow? They say, No. A good leader becomes irrelevant vis-a-vis the institutions they have built. If you are a good leader, you should be able to step down and say, here you go, carry on. And that's what's missing right now. When I look at many countries that are led by, that evolve from conflict, I don't see that brand of leadership that comes in with an exit strategy, institutions as the center of their engagement, building institutions that are solid, inclusive, and so on. So I think that's the kind of discussion we should be having. The test should be, don't tell me that this leader is good because they grew their economy by 20%. Tell me this leader is good because these are the new institutions that they have built.
I want to apologize. I've seen Christopher's hands up. Has been up for a while. I'm trying to watch everybody, but I think his hands up for a while. So, Christopher, you still there? Oh, yeah, you're still there.
Yeah, I'm still here. Thanks, Léonce, for your presentations. Very interesting, and it's great to have, your personal experience and background from development and economy perspective. I just was going to add to what Anne said earlier. This phrase of the warlord democrat we see, throughout East Africa, right? Military leaders are able to transition into governance by bringing their constituencies with them. It was more of a comment that you can respond to if you'd like to. I think that there's a challenge here with the subjectivity of the trust and relationship between the people, the state, and the trust between them. That if warlord democrats or other leaders are able to bring that constituency with them and develop enough trust from that group, but not from a more broader, coalition of groups and people in society, they have enough power to do what they want and will build institutions that, sort of live within that subjectivity of their constituents and their own interests and not expand any broader. And I know, Rwanda's a challenging topic, but, we can see that in, present day Rwanda. And it's a challenging run, right? Because you have peace and security that have been, largely established for the majority. But then, when you talk to Rwandans that live abroad or, perhaps folks who live in rural settings, right? Those institutions and that trust doesn't exist for them, but it's just for the, that core constituency. So again, it's a bit of a problem, but it's a problem that's a good one to have because you've got to figure it out. Right? Mm-hmm. So I'll leave that with you, and perhaps there's some better questions there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that you're touching on, again, a central question about how do you build trust and expand it to not just your comfort zone. It's easy to remain in your family setting and your neighborhood and say you have built trust, because those people trust you anyway. So it's not, you didn't have to do much. But the problem is that trust is going to be fragile because it cannot sustain the test of time and stress on the system. Because even though you may have a strong group of constituents that support you, that are invested in you, time is a challenge, and the law of large numbers is a challenge too. You cannot suppress the majority forever. History has demonstrated that over and over again. And in fact, the better strategy is to first of all look long term and think that you may be, if you have a small cake and you can say, let me eat the whole thing for myself, versus let me divide it a little bit to everybody so that over time it grows. And even though I'm going to have a small share of the cake, it's a bigger cake that's growing and I'm going to have more. So when you think about, as I said, many times when you look at the post-conflict regimes, they made the leaders are into building wealth really, really fast for themselves. But then they are eroding the base for development for the country as a whole. And in the end, I don't think they are better off in terms of long-term perspective, because as I keep saying, it's very easy to build a building on sand in 2 weeks. It's going to collapse in one day. So you have to ask yourself, how solid is the foundation of the system you have? Can it withstand the test of time? Can it withstand the test of stress from contrarian forces which are not benefiting from that system? And unfortunately, the reason why the question is so hard is, in addition to the fact that groups that are in control of the regime and are only building trust within themselves, they become strong enough to temporarily suppress the challenge from the rest. But also the rest of the world, since my sister Aisetu was mentioned this very important international dimension, the international dimension doesn't help, in the sense that world leaders are happy supporting anyone who seems to be in control because they'll be able to do their thing, okay? And that it's very hard to see world leaders challenging apparently successful leaders who are developing their countries in terms of material development, even though they know they are building on shaky grounds, because they would be seen as not buying into success. But that success is very fragile from a long-term perspective. Thanks again.
So if you want to engage us, we have a question from Dr. Immaculée, and then Dr. Janine's hands it up, but she has a question, but I think she should lead us out. She's our fearless leader and she should lead us out of the conference. So why not end with her? So Dr. Immaculée, and then our fearless leader, Dr. Janine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I will be quick. So you gave us homework and I will do it, but I also have, a homework.
She's a teacher, so she understands homework. Yeah.
Yes, and a good student too.
Yeah.
So my homework, there is a famous quote by Chinua Achebe, mm-hmm. that they put a knife to the things that brought us together, and we've fallen apart. Mm. Now, my question is, yes, you are presenting this from the modern perspective. But we also know that we keep claiming that before colonization, we were together. Even if the presentation from Uganda showed us that not necessarily. But we had some institutions that were good. So what do you think about reconciling what was good in the way we were, societies were organized? Because we had really powerful kingdoms then. And the way society is organized the way, the whites taught us. How can we perhaps reconcile them to come up with our own model?
Yeah. I think that's a fundamental question. I think, did you say you're writing a book? That's your next book. Because again, I think the fundamental point you make is we should not think that these societies were created ex nihilo by the colonial system, that they just emerged out of nowhere and then the colonial system gave them a shape. No, they did exist, and they had solid institutions that were in charge of the government, of the security and everything. They had their own problems. But I think the best strategy would be to look at how do we leverage traditional inherited assets in terms of structure, relationships, and trust. So, for example, why is it that with all its weaknesses, that the kingdoms were such that there was this ability of the king to get people to do what they have to do, but also this idea, whether it was true or not, that the king was the protector of everybody. Okay, so how did it happen? How was it lost? How was it abused or used? I think those will be useful questions to ask to see how to build on the traditional roots of the institutions and learn from the modern styles of governance and see how we get a better blend of institutions. Because again, the danger is when you say institutional building, people say, okay, let's go see how they do it in Japan. Let's go see how they do it in France. No, it won't happen. It's not going to be integrated in the society in a successful fashion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And we'll end with our fearless leader.
Yes.
Who are you talking about? I don't know who that is.
That would be you.
Thank you so much. This is incredible. I just feel, some people would say, I feel like I just ate my favorite chocolate. I feel like I just ate my favorite dish, which is a special bugari with cassava made out of cassava. Anyway, it's not flour, it's the way they make the cassava. In Kirundi, uswage. Okay. Oh. With anchovies and garden eggs. That's my favorite dish, and I just feel like I'm satisfied. That's all I could say. I'm really satisfied. Thank you so much. What a great way to end this conference. I'm glad you accepted the invitation, and you absolutely did a wonderful job. So thank you again so much. And then I'd like to take the opportunity first to thank all the participants who joined our conference this year. I hope you got to learn as much as I did. Really, we had a wonderful lineup of presentations. Some of them are still with us here. Thank you so much, presenters. You did a fantastic job. And then I'd like to also thank our conference organizers, Dr. Chieze, Dr. Isetu, Ibrahima, who is also our our acting director for the center while I'm on sabbatical. I'd like also to thank Dr. Sharon Beteya, who all three of them really contribute to making this conference be a successful event. And I'd like to thank Salma. Is she here, Salma? Salma is a phenomenal, yes, thank you so much, Salma, a phenomenal organizer. I mean, she kept us all together, all the pieces were all over, but she brought them all together smoothly with the dignity. It was beautiful to watch you in action, Salma. And then there's Perla. I don't know if Perla is here. Thank you so much for the support of our center and of the event. And there's also, now we still are with some of the members of the team, the research team, I'd like to thank you all for the wonderful job you're doing to grow the center. Dr. Christopher here, if you can show us, yeah, there you are. And who else do we have? I think everybody is, oh, Nadej. There's Nadej from Purdue University. Christopher is from Northeastern, and Nadej is from Purdue University. So thank you, thank you. I think that's all who's still here on the platform. So thank you so much, everyone. I'm sorry.
You had the question.
Oh, it's time. I mean, we need to let people go. I know how to find him. So, and he's right. My question could take 2 hours. But really, thank you, everybody for participating in this year's conference. We see you next year around this same time. And I can tell you this evening we'll be deciding on the theme for next year. So we hope we'll keep you posted. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Have a nice weekend.
Amazing. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.